The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning to all those who have joined in already for today's Relational Solutions webinar on dealing with out of stocks. We'll be starting the presentation here in just a few minutes, so we ask you to hang on as we let a few more people sign in. Hello and welcome everyone. This is Karen from Relational Solutions. I'll be your host today for our Stop Letting Out of Stock Hurt Your Bottom Line webinar. We value your time, so let's jump in and get started. For the next 30 minutes, we will take a close look at out of stock issues and how our customers use analytics to turn it around and increase profits. We will be recording today's webinar, which will be available afterwards on our YouTube channel. A few quick reminders before we get started. First, we have enabled the chat, so please feel free to ask your questions. Given this short time frame on today's webinar, we will address those at the end. And we have muted all the participants, but we also ask that you hit your mute button to avoid any interference. Lastly, this is intended to be a high-level overview. If you're interested in a more in-depth look, we're happy to arrange a one-on-one demo for you. Today's presenter is Relational Solutions co-founder, Janet Dorncott. Janet has over 20 years of experience in business intelligence. In 1996, she founded Relational Solutions and deals with the complex issues associated with integrating point of sale and syndicated data with internal data, trade plans, shipments, and cost of goods sold. The company was recently acquired by Mindtree and is now Mindtree's Center of Excellence for Analytics. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Janet to kick off today's presentation.
Thanks, Karen. Okay. So we've got this agenda laid out for today. We're going to give you a very brief background on Mindtree and relational solutions in that acquisition. We're also going to talk about mostly case studies. We're going to give examples of where our customers were able to improve sales and increase profits by doing things like identifying costly replenishment issues, reclaiming lost sales dollars, and getting alerts on where things are out of stock. We've also got some examples of the perfect store, what we call the perfect store anyway, root cause analysis, suggested order quantities, and things like that. So we'll go through those case studies. We're going to spend the bulk of the day doing that, and we're also, or I should say the bulk of the time, and we're also going to then go into what makes that so difficult and why aren't people doing this already. And then once we do that, we're going to talk about what else can we do. So besides using point of sale data for out of stock, there's other things that we can leverage that point of sale data for. So we'll talk about that a little bit too, and then give you some next steps to follow as well. So real quick, a little bit of an overview of Mindtree. We have over 17,000 employees. We call them Mindtree Minds. They don't actually call them employees. We have over 17,000 now. We do over $700 million in annual revenue. Our sales year over year has been in the double digits for the past 5 years. I believe actually even since inception they've been at least in the 9%, but double digits since the inception of Mindtree. We are in over 17 countries and we have 42 offices. As Karen mentioned, we are their center of excellence for analytics across the world here in Cleveland, Ohio. So some of our offerings include, we mainly focus on 4 different market segments: travel and hospitality, CPG and retail, banking and financial, and technology and media. Relational solutions falls mainly in that CPG and retail space, but we do some work in the hospitality industry with restaurants because they also have point of sale data, as well as hotels. And we do a lot of work also with the technology and media space. So there's some overlap there, which is why we're part of their digital team. And the reason there's overlap is because e-commerce is another source of sales. So whether they're selling through their own website or whether they're selling through websites like Amazon, we can integrate those data sources as another channel as well. So there's a lot of overlap, which is one of the attractions that Mindtree had to relational solutions. We focus mainly on analytics and data integration. Our background is in data warehousing, and over 20 years ago, we started focusing on data warehousing and data integration. And we did that originally across all industries. But with the added complexity that consumer goods manufacturers have with integrating syndicated data and data that's coming in from all these different retailer sources, we felt it was a necessary avenue for, there really was no good solution for the CPG manufacturers. So we started focusing specifically on CPG manufacturing back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it wasn't because we didn't take on any other data warehouse projects. I mean, we built the data warehouse for Chase Manhattan Bank and Timken Industries. We were really the go-to company for integration issues because we knew data integration very, very well. So in terms of aligning data and making sure that we had that in a clean format, we used to do that across all industries, but our focus became consumer goods manufacturers. And that's because of the additional value add we brought to the table there. That additional value add was our POS Smart application. That incorporates not just the analytics, but the underlying architecture required to make those analytics reliable. We've designed a data model that would integrate and validate data across all of those different sources. We built in the different retail calendars. We built in reporting metrics that would allow a company getting very limited data to really expand on that information. We also built in different retail mappings as well as EDI transformations and cleansing and validation processes. So with that, we started marketing our POS Smart application, and that's what led Mindtree to us, because we not only had that expertise in CPG, which is one of their 4 industry segments, but we had that expertise in the integration and validation processes as well as integrating digital data. Again, we have over 40 offices throughout the world, In North America, we have 3 centers, delivery centers, and those delivery centers are in Cleveland, Gainesville, Redmond. Warren, New Jersey is our corporate headquarters in the U.S. Our worldwide headquarters are in India. And we also have a very large Indian presence where we can tap into some offshore resources that are now also very familiar with our analytics and our integration processes. In this time last year, as a matter of fact, Mindtree had several acquisitions. Shortly before July, they did a Discoverture acquisition. In July, they acquired both Relational Solutions and Bluefin. We specialize in the data integration. Bluefin is the #1 SAP HANA implementation partner. They actually have offices in SAP. So we are partnered with them, and that actually works out very well because many of our customers have SAP, and we can supplement some of the work they're doing there as they can with us. There are often customers that want us to populate SAP HANA, and in almost every case, SAP is a source of, in some way, shape, or form. Magnet 360 is one of the leading Salesforce implementation partners. That also complements what we do very well because it's often the sales teams that want to be able to understand their customers better, and so we've had some integration going on with them as well. So to our CPG focus, and with this I'm going to go ahead and start talking about some of the case studies. But as you can see, we've got a very large customer base with very big names in those different areas. And there's a lot of overlap between some of these as well. So Demand Signal Repository, most of the companies that we're building a DSR for, we're also doing analytics for, and most of those we're also doing some predictive analytics for. More and more, as we implement our POS Smart solution, customers want us to implement and integrate trade data, so we developed our application called Trade Smart, and for some of these customers, we're doing that as well. In some of these examples, we're looking at, for example, in the digital marketing space, those are customers that Mindtree has developed digital platforms and e-commerce platforms for, and they're doing significant work in that space. We're now in the process with several of those customers of integrating some of the e-commerce data into the Demand Signal Repository. So there's definitely some overlap on what's going on, and as this industry is evolving, we're expanding on many of these different projects. So again, we're going to get into some specific case studies here as well. And we want to focus mainly on things like replenishment, suggested order quantities, and things like that. So I pulled up and I grabbed some of our customers where they would be relevant case studies. In this example, this is a client food company with products ranging from peanut butter and jelly to coffee beans to pet food. We built their Demand Signal Repository originally for their vendor-managed inventory team. And we worked with a wide range of data sources, including their direct downstream point-of-sale retailer data, EDI data. We worked with multiple IRI databases as well as their internal master data. We also had to integrate their shipments and order data. The data sizes were actually in the terabytes. They needed us to do that because they needed to know things like how their sales were aligning with their shipments. And they needed to know and understand things like their inventory turns. How does that compare with their competitors, for example? Where are items selling? Are there geographies that sell one product better or worse than other geographies, and what was driving that? Are they growing or shifting volume? Are they selling one product and cannibalizing the sales of another one of their products? They needed to understand also things like their price and compare that against different geographies and channels to understand if they were competitive or not. So really we were looking at their on-shelf availability. We were tracking their on-shelf availability, producing out-of-stock reports. We were predicting out-of-stock. We still are. We're also looking at things like phantom inventory, zero scan, and even some root cause analysis in this case. In this example, this manufacturer had to need to develop their develop their retailer's understanding of what they might be able to sell that they're not already selling. So what we did in this case is we helped to do some cross-selling, and we used R, which is a technology. It's an open source technology that we use to develop predictive analytics and models and scripts. And it looks at one store and the stores around that store to see if it accurately reflects the products in the proper assortment, along with the mix and the volumes that they should be carrying. It takes into account things like store size and what various retailers near them are selling. For example, in one case, and I'll just use this as an example, these aren't the actual retailers, but Target was carrying a product and selling about $100,000 worth of product, that particular product, per month. But Walmart, right across the street, wasn't even carrying that product. In this case, a rep could use that information to tell Walmart that they're losing business. For this calculation, in order for us to make those calculations, we had to do some cross-referencing. Also, there's an opportunity to introduce complementary items into stores and help them grow their sales as well. In this case, the customer had replenishment questions and issues. They needed to understand replenishment better. They had issues with understanding their orders and their safety stock requirements. They needed to understand what must be in stock. There were some shrink issues and unsaleables that they needed to be tracking. They had assortment that they had to figure out based on certain demographics. So they wanted us to offer suggested order quantities, and we can suggest quantities for any item across the globe based on either their POS, shipments, and orders. Certain areas they had point-of-sale data, other areas they don't have point-of-sale data. So we could also leverage their shipments and orders to give them some suggested order quantities. In this case, we also provided seasonal information. So the suggested order quantity in advance tells you, based on history and information leading up to that event, what should be ordered. But the seasonal suggested order quantity was more predictive. And in order to calculate this, we used historical sales and sales data leading up to that event. In this customer, they had a need for demand forecasting. And in this case, we used historical sales data to determine future demand and better project inventory needs. They needed to know at what price do sales fall off, at what price do sales accelerate, what is the optimal price in each geography and channel, does the product sell better or worse during certain seasons or weather events or social media events, and what's actually influencing that. And again, in this case, we were also integrating digital information so that we could help them really understand, all channels and not just their retail channels, but their digital channels as well. In this case, the customer needed to understand root cause analysis. So if your product's not on the shelf at the retail store and it has no opportunity to sell in that case, our solution enables you to track lost sales even without counting on retailer on-hand information. We compare expected sales to actual sales and send alerts out when stores are not living up to expected and out of stock is likely. So we put together the logic and the decision tree. We put that in place to distinguish between upstream supply, manufacturing distribution centers, retail distribution centers, third-party distributors, and store-level or demand issues that led to an out-of-stock occurrence. And this logic can begin with consumption data, but we also like to make it a little bit more robust by incorporating other internal data such as orders and shipments. We also have the ability to do something called virtual on-shelf availability, where we don't actually rely on the retailer inventory information to calculate this, especially for DSD or direct store delivery manufacturers. We have an algorithm that learns. So our out-of-stock is based on an estimated sales rate. We compare that to then what shipped and what sold. We also put together something that we call the perfect store. And the perfect store, this is the analytics we use to determine whether a rep is implementing the suggested order quantities that we're actually recommending. So this is a learned process that takes into consideration our recommendations and what was actually ordered by the rep out in the field. So for example, if we said, we're giving a suggested order quantity of 10 cases this week, and maybe you only deliver once a week. And that rep receives that suggested order, but identifies the fact that, okay, we have 6 of them in the back room that were never put out, so we really don't need to order 10. We'll go ahead and order 4. And over time, maybe they sell through all 4 of those, plus the 6 that were in the back room, and they didn't know they were going to sell through all 6 because they hadn't had those on the shelf. So there was maybe a backlog of need out there. What our rep is then able to do is then the next week we may be giving a suggested order quantity of 4. He now realizes that we will sell all 4 of those, and on top of that, we should probably be ordering 3 more. So he might put in an order of 7. So over time, between the sales rep out in the field and our own learned algorithms, we're going to get that number right. We're going to tweak that number until that suggested order quantity produces what we call the perfect store. So it also tells us, we can do things like understand how many stores are authorized to sell that item, how many are selling, are the stores that are based on that sales rate or other variables. What should we be using to determine that? So the perfect store gives us the best mix of product assortment, placement, space, and price by store. We also can put together scorecards that measure how a store is performing versus KPIs. The other thing that we do is store clustering, so we can group stores based on common store and or demographic characteristics, and we can take those clusters and we can build from that things like sales performance, understands the size and type and demographics of those stores, so we can kind of come up with characteristics of those stores and then determine the best mix of merchandise and the assortment quantities that they should be ordering. So those are some examples of case studies. We want to touch on what makes this so difficult, because everybody wants to be able to do some of these things, but it's very complex in most cases. And the reason for that is that you've got a lot of different sources of data out there. And those sources of data can be point-of-sale sources, they can be syndicated data sources, they can be your own internal shipments, they can be Nielsen, weather trend information, loyalty data. So all of this is out there, and analysts have access to this information, and in most cases they think they have too much data. And in my opinion, you can never really have too much data, but you can have very disorganized data. And if we take that data and we leave it disorganized, then those analysts are spending their entire day gathering, cleaning, integrating, justifying, trying to figure out how to align that information with internal data and with other data sources and with the various calendars. And the reason that that's so difficult is because there's a dozen reasons why that's so difficult. These are kind of a list at a high level of what makes that so difficult to do, and I'm going to touch on these in a little bit more detail and go through them one at a time, because I think a lot of analysts will take a look at this and truly understand and be able to verbalize back to their management what makes this so truly difficult. So first of all, you get the different retailer data, and every retailer provides different data elements. They don't all have the same standard data elements, and even when you're getting EDI feeds that are supposed to be standardized, you've got a whole slew of data elements that are supposed to be incorporated or could be incorporated. One retailer might provide 4 of those data elements. Another retailer might provide 200 of those data elements. So when you have different retailers providing different data elements, you have to somehow try and figure out how you're going to align that. And then you've got the different retailer end week dates. So you might just be getting data from Nielsen, and you might get that on the first week of the month for the prior month. Well, how do you align that and correlate that with a retailer whose calendar week is Sunday through Saturday and another whose is from Monday through Sunday? It's a time-consuming process, and there has to be calculations involved in that, because you have to then break out those Saturdays or Sundays and try and estimate, well, of those sales that Nielsen is saying that we had last month, how many of them were actually in that first week? And by the way, that retailer's first week is different than our first week. So how do I justify that? All of those things require complex calculations and macros that people develop. And the problem is, anytime they develop those macros and something changes, they've got to change the macro and start from scratch again. Then, of course, you have the different sources and the different formats. So you might be getting EDIA 52 files. You might be buying data from IRI or Nielsen. You might be able to FTP right into the Nielsen site, but with IRI you have to download it. You might be able to use a screen scraper to take data out of Walmart's retail link, but you might need to download the data, for example, from Target because they don't provide that capability. So there are a lot of manual processes that are occurring that have to be streamlined. Now, some of those processes we can streamline completely. Others, we can just take the data once it's been downloaded. But you've got all of this different data, and they're all coming in different formats. So sometimes it's a text file, sometimes it's a CSV file. Your internal data might be on an Oracle database somewhere, or it might be in SQL Server, or it might be on SAP on an Oracle platform. How do you get access to that data? And in many cases, people are using Access, the database itself. So how do I get all those data sources to be in a single common database type so that I can even begin to start reporting off of it? And then, of course, you have the retailer data that might come in late, or it might come in with missing data, or they might recast it because they were missing 3 days from last month. And maybe their portal's down, and you're pinging it all morning, and you're sitting there wasting time clicking on the link to download that information. Most of like common data issues we see are associated with UPC digits, where you might have one retailer padding it on the front end or the back end, or not, or just stripping off the extra digits entirely. So how do you justify that? How do you do that without having to do that manually or create some sort of a macro? Well, the whole idea behind what we've developed with POSmart is we've got a foundation that cleanses and validates this data, integrates all these different data sources. We've got over 200 cleansing processes to take care of things like the EDI inconsistencies, the UPC digits, the recast data. So all of these things are handled within our engine. And then, of course, you've got different vernacular. From retailer to retailer, you've got different hierarchies, different drill downs, and you even have different teams internally that want to drill down differently. So how in the world do you handle that? Well, Nielsen does it in certain ways that the retailers might not, or that other syndicated data providers might not. They do their best to standardize certain things, but internally you still have your own vernacular. So how do you manage that? These are all things that we apply then in business rules within the integration engine. And then we also give you the ability to create your own hierarchies, and you can have multiple hierarchies, but we also have standard hierarchies so that we do maintain that consistency across the company. Then you also have the issue with data feeds. So what do you do when you're only getting Nielsen data once a month and it's for the prior month and it's late? Well, you're making decisions in retrospect, and that's what you're doing, or you're using data from a year ago. You might get RMA data on an annual basis, so you might get zip code information updated on an annual basis. You might get weather trend information that you're buying quarterly. On the other hand, you might get POS data from some retailers' data daily, and you might get it weekly from others, and then you might have the ability to access it multiple times a day like you can through retail portals. You've always got the issue with changing market conditions. The economy changes. There's a national disaster somewhere. There's the retailer contracts change. Maybe a retailer decides they're no longer going to send their data to a third party any longer. Any time that there's a change made by not only market conditions but the retailer's decisions, you're forced to go in and change whatever algorithms that you finally created to streamline one tiny piece of it. With our solution, we're streamlining that whole integration process, and when there's an anomaly that occurs, you fix it that day. It propagates throughout the system, and you no longer have to fix it again. With these other, if you're doing things manually, you're subject to changing those macros, or recreating new macros and having to deal with it by manually integrating that data ongoing. These are just some other examples of things like retailer changes. Maybe you get a new buyer, and that buyer wants to focus on, maybe they're responsible for a certain category, but they want to focus on different things. Or maybe you get a new CEO that wants to focus on a completely different category, which we're seeing a lot of. For example, the food companies, we're seeing a lot of management focusing on organics and focusing on more nutritious food items than they had in the past. So there's, you're subject to all of those changes, or maybe they decide to make some policy changes or add a new store or buy a new company or merge or sell off part of their company. And then that's the sources you can't control. They're outside of your company. What about the ones you can't control that are inside your company? Someone wants to update their Nielsen contract. Someone wants to switch from buying competitive data from Nielsen to buying panel data from IRI, or buying, maybe you don't want to get those POS reports from them anymore. You're building a DSR and you want to develop those reports, but now you've got money freed up to actually buy competitive data that you didn't have access to before. Someone else now decides, oh, we're going to switch from SAP to Oracle now. So all of a sudden your shipment data is no longer in the format you expected it, and it's no longer in the database type that you had it in before. You're subject to those kind of changes as well. With the POS Smart application, we're streamlining that whole integration process. We're putting it into a synchronized, validated, cleansed database where you can now report off of that and get consistency. So how do we go beyond that out-of-stock information? To develop those out-of-stock reports, we had to go through the process I just described, and we had to tackle all those data issues that I just described to you that all of our customers have. But now we want to go beyond just understanding out-of-stock, and we want to go beyond suggested order quantity and even root cause analysis, because now our trade team is interested in understanding ROI, for example. Well, where we've got our smart architecture in place, it not only integrates the different retailer data that you see on the left-hand side, and those are just to make, you know, I've just pulled a few retailer names, very common ones, of course, and then you've got your internal data. All of these things exist at our customers, and what our solution does is on a nightly basis, it looks for new data, it synchronizes it, it stages that data, and then it loads it into the database so that you can do your reporting off of clean, valid data. It also schedules reports to run so that you're freed up to actually be a data scientist. So your common reports that everybody needs on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, or whatever the frequency is, you can schedule those to run, and they're automatically pushed out to the end users. But now you're freed up to analyze new data. And as you learn more and more about your business, you're going to want to know more and more about your business. And the trade teams are very hot right now because they're trying to understand ROI. They're basically running promotions based on what they did last year, and we see this across the board. Now, with point-of-sale data, we can actually pull in trade information, and we can leverage our data model there, and we can say, okay, now that we've understand our out-of-stocks and our root cause, and we're getting alerts on suggested order quantities, and we're looking at our perfect store, now let's understand what promotions are effective, because most customers are spending a ton of money, sometimes upwards of 20 to 25% of total revenue on promotions. Well, we need to understand better what promotions are working best at what stores. And by pulling in trade plan data along with cost of goods sold and shipments and your IRI data, for example, and your baseline, we can really help to understand which promotions are effective, which ones aren't effective, where to realign that money, and where to save on your promotions. And so to really give them a full ROI analysis. So that underlying, that first bar there, that represents that underlying architecture. On the front end, we've got our Blue Sky Analytics, but you can use any tool. We've got Clickstream, we've got Tableau, we've got Business Objects accessing our architecture. The key is you can't just go out and buy a front-end tool and think the problem's going to be solved. This underlying architecture is the most important piece that handles all of those data quality issues. This is just another example. I wanted to jump back into a quick case study where not only did we integrate and leverage the EDI orders and shipment data for vendor-managed inventory and for better understanding of out-of-stocks, we then took that data and we leveraged it by integrating trade data, cost of goods sold, and some other plan data to really help them get the full ROI out of their trade promotions as well. So taking it beyond out-of-stocks, the infrastructure is designed to support not just category management teams and VMI teams and trade teams, but even financial teams and logistics teams and your supply chain groups to really get a full view at your sales. So what do you do next? How do you get to that next step? Usually we send out, and Karen will follow up with this, we've got our complete getting started guide. And really, it's a very simple form. It's a one-page form that you can fill out to say, here are our most critical retailers, and here's what I need to have them integrated with. And then from there, we can come up with a plan that will fit your budget, even if you don't have a budget, because we can put this in the cloud, reduce costs, and even push out costs into the next year if we need to do that for you. But let's start getting an understanding of our out of stocks, and let's start helping customers understand right away what we're trying to do. And if you're able to get a fast return on investment, then that project's just going to grow. So the next step would be to complete our Getting Started guide, coordinate a demo with your peers, start with some of your key retailers and syndicated data providers, start automating some of the standard reports, providing new insights, and then take it to the next level where we're then doing some predictive and prescriptive recommendations for you. The other thing that our company does as well is we do analytics as a service. So if you don't have the bandwidth, we know there's a shortage of category managers and business analysts and trade analysts. We are very, very familiar with that shortage. As the Analytics Center of Excellence for Mindtree, we have ramped up our analytics team, and we're available and ready to help you if you need help even in the analytics piece. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Karen.
Thanks, Janet. That was a great quick look at remedying the out-of-stock issues. If you are interested in that full demo, please contact me, or to get the next steps, I'll be sending those out to all of our webinar registrants here today. And we'll be happy to schedule any direct follow-ups, one-on-ones for your team. We wanted to thank everyone for your time today and invite you to follow our Relational Solutions training blog by going to our website at relationalsolutions.com and clicking on our resources page. We do regularly update our posts and industry information on LinkedIn under our Demand Signal Repository Institute. And today's training will be posted on our Relational Solutions YouTube channel. You can also stay connected by following us on Twitter and Facebook, and you're welcome to always email myself or Janet with any comments or questions. We do love hearing your feedback so that we can understand better where our customers are at in this process. We look forward to hearing from everyone, and again, thanks for your time today.